I never thought my life would take such an unexpected turn during what was supposed to be a routine doctor's appointment. At 37, I was in the prime of my life, married to a wonderful man named David, and living comfortably in a suburban neighborhood just outside of Portland. We had been married for 10 years, and while our relationship was strong, it had settled into a predictable routine. I thought I knew what to expect from life, but all of that changed one chilly October evening when I found myself alone in my doctor's office. Dr. Harris had been my physician for several years. He was in his early 40s, tall, with salt and pepper hair, and a calm, reassuring demeanor that made every visit feel comfortable. He was a professional through and through, always focused on the job at hand, and I never once thought of him as anything more than my doctor, until that evening. It had been a particularly long day at work, and I almost canceled my appointment, but something made me go through with it. I arrived at the office just before closing, the waiting room empty, the lights dimmed. The receptionist had already left for the day, and the only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning as I sat down, waiting for Dr. Harris to call me in. When he finally opened the door and called my name, I stood up, offering him a tired smile. "Sorry I'm late. It's been one of those days." He smiled back, a warm, understanding smile that made me feel instantly at ease. "No problem at all, Jenna. Come on in. Let's get you checked out." I followed him into the exam room, the door clicking shut behind us. The room was quiet, the overhead lights casting a soft glow on the sterile white walls. I took a seat on the examination table as Dr. Harris pulled up a stool, flipping open my file. "So, what brings you in today?" he asked, his tone professional, yet with a hint of personal concern. "Just a routine checkup," I replied, trying to shake off the weariness of the day. "I've been feeling a little off lately, tired, stressed. I thought it might be a good idea to get everything checked out." He nodded, his expression thoughtful as he made a few notes. "Well, let's start with the basics then. I'll check your vitals and see how everything's looking." The examination began like any other: blood pressure, heart rate, temperature. Dr. Harris was thorough, as always, but there was something different in the air, a tension that I couldn't quite place, but that made my heart beat a little faster. Maybe it was just the lateness of the hour, the quiet of the office, or maybe it was something else entirely. As he listened to my heartbeat, his hand resting gently on my shoulder, I couldn't help but notice how close he was standing, how his presence seemed to fill the room. I pushed the thought away, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling lingered. "Your vitals look good," he said, stepping back and jotting down a few more notes. "But you mentioned feeling stressed. How's everything going at home? At work?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to share. Dr. Harris had always been kind and attentive, but this felt more personal than usual. Still, there was something in his eyes that made me want to open up, to tell him what had been weighing on me. "It's been okay," I finally said, my voice tinged with uncertainty. "Work is stressful, and David, well, things have been a bit distant between us lately. We're both so busy and it feels like we're just going through the motions sometimes." He nodded, his expression sympathetic. "That's understandable. Marriage can be challenging, especially when life gets hectic. It's important to take care of yourself, though. You need to find ways to manage that stress." "I know," I sighed, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. "It's just hard to find the time." Dr. Harris stood up and walked over to the counter, reaching for a small vial of essential oil. "Have you ever tried aromatherapy? It can be a great way to relax and de-stress." I shook my head, curious. "No, I haven't." He opened the vial and held it out to me. "Here, give this a try. It's lavender, very calming." I leaned in and inhaled deeply, the soothing scent filling my senses. "That's nice," I murmured, feeling a little of the tension in my shoulders ease. He smiled, setting the vial down and returning to his stool. Sometimes it's the little things that make a big difference. Taking a few minutes to relax, to breathe, it can help more than you might think. I nodded, appreciating his advice. But as I looked at him, I realized there was something different in his expression. Something softer, more personal. The professional distance that had always been there seemed to have faded, replaced by a warmth that made my heart skip a beat. "Thank you, Dr. Harris," I said, my voice quiet. "I appreciate you taking the time to listen. It means a lot." He reached out and gently placed his hand on mine, his touch sending a shiver down my spine. "Jenna, I'm always here if you need to talk. About anything." I looked up at him, my breath catching in my throat. There was something in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before, something that made my pulse quicken. I knew I should pull my hand away, that I should keep things professional, but I couldn't bring myself to move. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice trembling. For a moment, we just sat there, the silence between us heavy with unspoken emotions. And then, before I could fully process what was happening, Dr. Harris leaned in and pressed his lips to mine. The kiss was gentle at first, as if he was giving me a chance to pull away. But when I didn't, it deepened, his hand sliding to the back of my neck, holding me close. My mind screamed at me to stop, to remember that I was married, that this was my doctor. But my body refused to listen. I kissed him back, my hands gripping the edge of the examination table as I gave in to the moment. It was wrong, I knew that. But it was also exhilarating in a way I hadn't felt in years. The passion, the intensity, it was overwhelming, consuming me completely. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathless, our hearts pounding in unison. I stared at him, my mind a whirlwind of emotions, guilt, desire, confusion. "Jenna," he whispered, his voice filled with regret. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of emotions swirling in my mind. "No, I shouldn't have let it happen." "We can't do this," he continued, his hand still resting on my shoulder. "You're my patient, and you're married. This is wrong, and we both know it." "I know," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But..." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken feelings. I didn't know what to say, how to make sense of the emotions that were swirling inside me. I knew this was wrong, that I should leave and never look back, but I also knew that something had changed between us, something that couldn't be undone. "Maybe it's best if we end the appointment here," Dr. Harris said, his tone gentle but firm. "We can reschedule for another time, when things are clearer." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if clarity was something I could find right now. I slid off the examination table, my legs feeling shaky as I reached for my coat. "Thank you, Dr. Harris," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm sorry if I made things difficult." "You didn't," he replied quickly, his eyes softening. "This is on me. I crossed a line and I'm sorry for that. I don't know what came over me." I forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "It's okay. Really." He didn't say anything more as he walked me to the door, the silence between us heavy with unresolved tension. As I stepped out into the hallway, I turned back to look at him one last time. "Take care of yourself, Jenna," he said softly, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and something else, something that made my heart ache. "I will," I whispered. And then I was gone, the door closing behind me with a soft click. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with everything that had just happened. How had I let things get so out of control? How could I have allowed myself to kiss Dr. Harris, a man who had been nothing but professional and kind to me for years? And what did this mean for my marriage, for my life? When I finally pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a long moment, trying to gather my thoughts. The house was dark, a clear sign that David wasn't home yet. I should have felt relieved, but instead, I felt a deep sense of loneliness, of isolation. The guilt was overwhelming, but so was the desire, the longing that had been awakened in me. The following days were a mix of confusion and guilt. I couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Harris, about the way he had kissed me, the way his touch had made me feel. It was wrong, I knew that, but it was also intoxicating in a way I hadn't felt in years. The passion, the intensity. It was something I hadn't experienced in my marriage in a long time, and it scared me how much I craved it. David noticed the change in me, of course. He asked if everything was okay, if something was bothering me. But I brushed it off, telling him it was just stress from work. He seemed to accept my explanation, but the doubt lingered, a shadow that hung over our interactions. A week later, I received a call from Dr. Harris's office, asking if I wanted to reschedule the appointment. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to see him again, to talk to him, to try and make sense of what had happened between us. But another part of me knew that it was dangerous, that I was playing with fire. In the end, I decided to go through with it. I needed closure, needed to understand what had happened and why. I needed to know if it was just a moment of weakness or if there was something more between us. When I arrived at the office, my heart was pounding in my chest. The receptionist greeted me with a warm smile, completely unaware of the turmoil that was raging inside me. I took a seat in the waiting room, my mind racing as I tried to prepare myself for the conversation that was about to take place. When Dr. Harris finally called me in, I stood up on shaky legs, forcing myself to stay calm. The examination room felt different this time, tenser, more charged with emotion. I could see the apprehension in his eyes as he closed the door behind us. "Jenna," he began, his voice gentle, "I'm glad you decided to come in. I think we need to talk about what happened." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "I agree." He took a deep breath, his hands clasped together as he sat down on the stool. "First of all, I want to apologize for crossing a line. It was unprofessional, and it never should have happened." "I'm just as much to blame," I replied quickly, not wanting him to shoulder all the guilt. "I kissed you back. I let it happen." He shook his head, a sad smile on his lips. "I should have known better. You're my patient, Jenna, and I care about your well-being. What happened, it was a mistake, and I'm sorry if I've caused you any distress." I looked down at my hands, trying to find the right words. "It's just, I haven't felt that way in a long time. And I guess I don't know. I was drawn to you." He reached out and gently took my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You're an amazing person, Jenna, and I'm flattered that you felt that way. But we both know that this can't go any further. You're married, and I have a responsibility to you as your doctor." I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "I know. I don't know what to do with these feelings." "Feelings can be complicated," he said softly, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. "But you need to think about what's important to you, about what you really want. And I think you know that continuing down this path isn't the answer." I looked up at him, my vision blurred by tears. "I don't want to lose my marriage, but I don't want to lose you either." He smiled, a sad, understanding smile. "You're not losing me, Jenna. I'll always be here for you as your doctor and as someone who cares about you. But we have to keep things professional, for both our sakes." I nodded, knowing he was right. It was the logical thing to do, the responsible thing, but it didn't make it any easier. As the appointment came to an end, I stood up, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had been said. Dr. Harris walked me to the door, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Take care of yourself, Jenna," he said softly, his eyes filled with concern. "And if you ever need to talk, I'm here." "Thank you," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I appreciate that." With that, I left the office, the door closing behind me with a finality that made my chest ache. The drive home was a blur, my mind spinning with everything that had happened. I knew that this was the right decision, that I needed to focus on my marriage, on finding a way to reconnect with David. But it didn't make the pain any less real. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my marriage, trying to rebuild the connection that had been lost. I planned date nights, tried to engage in meaningful conversations, and made an effort to be more present in our relationship. And slowly, things began to improve. David noticed the change in me, and he responded in kind, our bond growing stronger with each passing day. But there was still a part of me that couldn't forget Dr. Harris, that couldn't forget the way he had made me feel. It was a memory that lingered in the back of my mind, a reminder of the line I had crossed and the consequences of my actions. In the end, I knew that I had made the right choice. My marriage was worth fighting for, and I was determined to make it work. But I also knew that I had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of boundaries, about the dangers of letting emotions cloud your judgment. As I moved forward, I carried with me the memory of that October evening, the memory of the moment when everything changed. It was a reminder of the thin line between desire and destruction, and the choices we make that define our lives.